Welcome back, Chappelle. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flip classroom and the beginning of our next unit, right? So the big thing about it is we do not normally do this, right? We don't normally take our tests and then jump straight into a new unit and stuff like that. But look, I'm recording this thing a couple days early. I'm actually recording this bad boy like on this like random dress down day that we have in the middle of the week and stuff like that. Trying to get ahead of the game, trying to make sure that y'all are ready to get after it, and also just trying to make sure that you have several days to do this bad boy, right? I know B period and C period and F period and every period that I have that's an academic class has been working super hard, getting prepared for that last test, reviewing, getting after it, and doing a lot of really important stuff, all right? So the big thing about it, though, is let's go ahead and dive into our new unit. We're about to start our unit with unit number, I think by this point, it's unit number 7. This is going to be Absolutism in Europe, and it's one of my absolute hands-down favorite units to talk about. So the thing about it that we need to understand is what is absolutism, right? When you're talking about absolutism, you have to first start off by the fact that you need to define what that concept is, right? So absolutism is a little bit of an abstract thing. It's something that you've probably never encountered before. It's a word that you've probably never had to define before. It's a word that you probably never had to know because it's something that's based mostly in European politics, right? Like circa 1600, right? Right around the areas of like 1600 up to the 1700s is when absolutism truly took off. Well, unless you're in Russia, and then actually took place in the 17s mostly than anything else, right? Well, also you could argue the 16s as well with Ivan the Terrible, but we'll talk about all that stuff a little bit later on. Absolutism is such a big deal, though, and it's so connected to the state that you live in, right? More than any other state in the entire country of the United States of America, you are more connected to absolutism than any other one. Because Louisiana, when you think about absolutism, the very first person that pops into everyone's mind is Louis XIV, the absolutist of Europe, the guy that is like the cookie cutter for all other absolutists that would come before or after him or whatever. If you wanted to be an absolutist, you basically wanted to be Louis, right? And what, of course, what only state in this entire country is named after that man? Louisiana, right? Named after Louis XIV, the premier absolutist of Europe, right? The premier absolutist of France. Now, when we're looking at it, what this word means, right? Absolutism in general is a term to use to describe an all-powerful monarch, right? A monarch that has complete and utter control over everything. Now, some of y'all are going to immediately ask the question, well, what's the difference between an absolutist and a dictator, right? Well, the big difference between it is actually that dictators usually rise to power through the military, right? i.e. Roman dictators, right? The Roman dictator was brought in during a time of war. That's how they come to power. Whereas these guys, absolutist monarchs, are actually more hereditary rulers, right? They were put in power because of the family that they were born to. Their parents came before them and stuff like that and placed them on the actual throne. Now, the thing about it that you also need to understand is that absolutism hinges on the idea that the all-powerful monarch has power over the church, over the nobility, and over every other ruling body in general. Whatever they say goes, right? If it's off with their head, it's off with their head. If it's Taco Tuesday forever, it's Taco Tuesday forever, all right? Absolutists hold complete sway and do not have anybody that goes against their authority whatsoever, right? You have to understand the big thing about it, though, when you're looking at everything else, is that this is a major trend in Europe, and it's going to completely affect everything going forward because these absolutists are going to get a little arrogant, a little cocky. They're going to start taking rights away from people. Then the Enlightenment's going to happen. Then we're going to have revolutions on our hands, right? So the thing about it, though, is now that we know what absolutism is, this entire time period where all these European countries are being ruled by these really, really strong, powerful monarchs, we got to ask the question, why now? Why in the 1600s? Because as far as you've ever been told by, like Life or History or the Disney Channel, is that like kings and queens have always had ultimate power. In your mind, when you think of a king or a queen, you think of a strong central ruling body that is not checked by anyone, right? But of course, the thing about it is it didn't really take hold until the 1600s, right? Up until the 1600s, king's power was pretty limited, actually. Monarchs didn't have as much power as the nobles nor the church. So why now? Why the 1600s? Well, a lot of it has to do with several different factors, but one big one is feudalism is beginning to die, right? Feudalism in Western Europe in particular is starting to die off, right? And since that's occurring, the nobles are losing some power, right? And that's giving more power to the monarchs themselves. Feudalism is beginning to decline after exploration because of the massive influx of goods, products and things coming in from the colonies and also over the Atlantic Ocean, coming from places like North and South America, sugarcane, potatoes, pumpkins, turkeys, all these different items that are now coming in through the ports. You didn't need as many people to actually sit there and farm wheat or grains on these actual like feudal lands with these nobles and stuff like that. You didn't need hordes of people farming wheat and stuff like that because you had greater access to foodstuffs and other different wares, right? So now that we have a transatlantic trade network popping up, the Columbian Exchange is bringing all these goods in. We just don't need feudalism as much, right? You just don't need it as much whatsoever. And so really, really quickly, when I say power is growing, whose power is growing? The royals' power is growing. The kings, the queens, their power is growing. And a lot of it, too, is just because, you know what? In the long run, feudalism was going to die out eventually. It's a very outdated system, right? It's something from the Middle Ages that has held on for hundreds and hundreds of years. You could argue for over a millennia. Ever since the Viking raids began in the Middle Ages. Well, the thing about it is that this just doesn't work anymore. As technology advances, as the growth advances, and as cities begin to advance, it just doesn't make as much sense, right? So if feudalism is dying, it means that the nobles' power is dying, and if the nobles' power is dying, then that power must be going somewhere, right? And so another big thing about it, though, too, that's also causing a big shifting in power and stuff like that, is these religious wars that are going down, right? You have to understand that the late Reformation, after Martin Luther, after John Calvin, after all these other people, after the German Peasants' Revolt, you're going to see the pop-up of religious violence, and you're going to see the effects of the Reformation after it actually truly begins, and a lot of converts begin to go off into other directions. What's going to happen, though, in a lot of different countries, you're going to have armies led by Catholics, and you're going to have armies led by Protestants, and they're going to go against each other, right? They're going to fight, and it's going to lead to the massive the massive reduction in the power of the Catholic Church because they're losing converts, and they're also losing bodies in war, right? You also have to understand, too, that some of these religious wars are going to be massively chaotic, right? Crazy intense ones. For example, like the 30 Years' War, right? The 30 Years' War took place in 1618 to 1648, and it's actually going to lead to the death of over 3 million people in Europe due to famine, death, pestilence, sicknesses, all these other different things. And it's going to lead to the death of millions of people, weakening the church, losing even more followers, losing even more money, and losing even more power, right? As people began to continue to break off and form new Protestant sects, right? People begin to keep gravitating towards Lutheranism. People begin to keep gravitating towards Anglicanism in England and stuff like that. And then also towards Calvinism in other directions as well. Now, really quickly, it's important to understand that the bulk of Europe was still Catholic, right? The bulk of Europe was still Catholic. All of Italy was still Catholic. All of France is still Catholic. All of these different areas are Catholic. However, the Catholic Church just doesn't have the same kind of power that it used to during the Middle Ages, right? So this is really, really important that we see the fact that who are we talking about here? The waning power of the nobles and the waning power of the Catholic Church during events like this. This right here is the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. It's actually enacted by the Queen, Catherine de' Medici, back here. Oh, spoiler alert, we're going to talk about the Medicis again. Going against her new son-in-law, who was a Protestant, right? So the thing that we need to understand, though, is let's go ahead and symbolize this, right? We've got a couple of big words coming up right now that you're going to definitely need to know, but go ahead and buckle up, be prepared, because I'm about to show you all this stuff on a graph, right? So the thing that we need to understand is you can draw this if you want, however you want, or you can do whatever you want with it. I don't really care. But I'm going to try and give you a symbol to guide you through all these different ideas. What's going on in Europe? Why are these monarchs becoming so powerful? Where is all this power going, right? So we're going to treat this kind of like that Cartesian plane that like Descartes talked about. Here's our y-axis, right? As you move up this axis, it means you are more powerful, right? So now really, really quickly, during the Middle Ages, the most powerful ruling bodies were, of course, 3 different people. You had the church, you had the nobility, and you had the monarchs, right? But as you can see, the church was very, very powerful, and the nobles were very, very powerful. Why? Because the church actually ran your entire religious life. It demanded a tithe and a tax from you. It could wage war. It could do all these different things. And it actually carried so much political authority because they could actually dictate the direction of politics. They had papal suprematic power. They actually could sell indulgences. They could do all these different things. And they were wildly wealthy during the Middle Ages going into the Renaissance, right? So the church was extremely powerful. Then you had the nobility who owned a massive amount of land. And also the serfs were bound to that land by a contract, right? Most people lived on their lands or in conjunction with their lands as well. So they controlled most daily aspects of your life, right? But then you got down here, the monarchs. Notice really quickly, out of these three ruling bodies during the Middle Ages, the monarchs were the weakest of the three. Why is that, though? Why were the monarchs, out of everybody, the thing that Disney told you was really, really powerful, the weakest? Well, a lot of it has to do with limitations that monarchs had on them in the Middle Ages, mostly due to things like technology, right? So the thing about it that you need to understand is that monarchs had limited amounts of technology that even gave them the ability to rule efficiently or even claim as much power as they wanted to during the Middle Ages. Most people they were ruling over during the Middle Ages couldn't read and write. Most of them were dependent on the church or their nobles for their everyday life ideas, right? So the thing you need to understand is they also didn't even have roads. That's what infrastructure means. They didn't have complex roads that went to every single person's home. They didn't know where everyone in their country lived. They had no way of keeping track of them. Also, they lacked technology. Like, there wasn't even sophisticated postal services yet during the Middle Ages, so how could you even collect taxes efficiently? Also, the military. This is big. Notice all the stars that I have next to it. Whenever a monarch wanted to wage war during the Middle Ages, they actually had to call up the nobles, right? They had to call up the nobles and say, hey, we want to go to war with France. Send me your armies. Bring with you an army. And they would mush all the nobles' armies together, and they would march off towards war. But what if that noble doesn't like you? Can he just not show up? Yeah, if the noble doesn't want to show up with the military, he doesn't have to. So this is a massive amount of limitations on the monarchical power, right? They can't control their own military, they don't have the technology to tax effectively, and they don't even have roads to get to where they need to go, right? So the thing about it that you need to understand, though, is everything is going to change going into the 1500s. The Reformation is going to destroy the power of the church, leading to religious warfare, leading to a reduction in their monetary funds, leading to people breaking off, and leading to new religions popping up like Lutheranism and Calvinism, right? So their power is going to go down. And then the Exploration period and the Reformation period, because the nobles were the people fighting in a lot of these wars and stuff like that, is going to lead to a decline in noble power as well, because they're going to start losing money, right? Their farms are not going to be so necessary anymore. You don't need these serfs to work all day and night farming all this wheat and stuff like that. Now, are they still wealthy? Yes. But do they have as much power? No. So what's going to happen is we are now left with this thing known as a power vacuum. This bubble term thingy right here, wildly important. Make sure you have this word, make sure you have it written down, make sure you have it highlighted, right? So this power vacuum is when it was going to occur right around the 1500s. In the late 1500s, a massive space would be left open by the reduction in the power of the nobles and the church, and it's the absence of a ruler, right? Leaving space for replacement. So really, really quickly, people weren't as powerful anymore. The church had declined, the nobles had declined. So who is going to fill this void? None other than the monarchs, right? The monarchs are going to increase their infrastructure, build more roads, create professional militaries that they can send out to go and fight whenever they feel like or so choose, right? You got people like Henry VIII, Isabella, and Ferdinand are great examples of how monarchs are beginning to grow their power in the 1500s, going into an absolutist phase in the 1600s, right? And they're even going to create more efficient tax systems, right? So they're going to take all the things that limited their power in the Middle Ages, and they're going to flip it over on its ear, right? So that is how they're going to pull this off, and the monarchs are going to grow their power during the 1600s, okay? So that was just a really good visual example of why all this stuff happened, right? And also, you have to understand as well, no one predicted it other than your boy Machiavelli, right? He saw all this stuff coming. Quick review, who is this guy? He's that famous Renaissance writer who wrote The Prince, who begged the question, is it better for a ruler to be feared or loved, right? And he actually deduced the fact that he believed it was like, it's probably better for that ruler to be both, but if you got to pick one, you should probably be feared, right? So the thing about it in general is Machiavelli advocated for a strong central monarch. He thought the nobles were too powerful, like the Medici. He thought the church was too powerful because he watched literally some friar take over the entirety of Florence and then die, right? So the thing you need to understand is that the people of Europe are beginning to gravitate towards the idea of Machiavelli, towards the idea of a strong central ruler like a king or a queen who leads over everyone else, right? And so all of these things are going to give kings massive power and massive amounts of wealth, right? Now, the thing you need to know, though, is how do you spot an absolutist when you have one? Because a lot of other rulers try to become absolutists, but they never actually fully achieved it. Well, a lot of it has to do with these three things, right? And the best way to remember them is if you take your actual bullet points and go A, and then B, C, D, right? The ABCs of absolutists, right? So you have absolutism up here. Now let's do our B first, a bureaucracy, right? See the bureaucracy one right about here? what a bureaucracy is it's a multi-leveled government. An absolutist, to be able to achieve absolute authority, has to have a bureaucratic system. That means that they have people that go out and collect taxes for them, right? They have people that go out and lead the military for them. They actually are going to employ nobles in this, right? The nobles' power was reduced, so they're going to give them little bits and pieces and shreds of power to try and keep them loyal and stuff like that, right? So a bureaucratic system is just a multi-level government. And we'll talk more about that in class. We'll review it a little bit so we can better understand it and stuff like that. You also have to have a centralized government. Centralization of the government means you're ruling from one location, i.e., usually a capital city, right? And the last one is divine right rulership. All absolutists believed that they had been ordained by God to be in charge of their people and to lead them in the way of Christ, and then also to lead them in the way of their all-powerful nature, right? Kings believed that they were bestowed this power by God, and they invoked this idea via divine right rulership, right? But we will talk more about all that stuff when we get back into class, because we're then going to start moving into our big absolutist countries: Spain, France, Russia, and England. Sort of, kind of, right? So make sure you get all this little stuff. We'll review a little extra. We'll deepen our knowledge a little extra. We'll go a little further in our next class. I'll see y'all then. Y'all have a good one.